Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Oriana Romano. I'm leading the OECD Water Governance and Circular Economy programs at the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities at the OECD. I thank you all for participating in this webinar organized with Let's Talk About Water. This event is part of the OECD Water Days, started on the 22nd of March in the occasion of the World Water Day, which this year covered the theme of valuing water. This event, the OECD Water Days, will last until Friday, the 26th, with a dedicated session on water governance in Latin America and Asia. We invite you to join and to register to these webinars. Before we begin, I wanted to flag a few housekeeping matters. First, we are recording the webinar, so you can watch it again. We will make all of the webinars available on our webpage next week. This is a Zoom webinar format, so not everybody can take the floor, but we invite you to use the chat and to share your thoughts and address the panelists. You can also use the chat function to contact our support team for any technical issues you may experience. I'm happy to say that we have more than 100 registered participants, and we wish this webinar to be as interactive as possible. So we invite you to engage with us over the next hour. And also, please feel free to engage with us on Twitter at OECD Local, and also use the hashtag OECD Water Days. I will now pass the floor to Linda Linfield. Linda, the floor is yours.
Okay, does that mean I'm unmuted? I guess so. So welcome everybody to Let's Talk About Water at OECD Water Days. Many of you know me, and it is a very wonderful experience to be doing this experience with OECD. As many of you know, I am technically challenged, I talk a lot, and I have no sense of time. And so the idea that I'm hosting an event with my colleagues is pretty funny. So I'm going to have to try to be very succinct, which is not typical of me. And I have some wonderful panelists. And I just want to thank the OECD for hosting us, for the Secretary General Guria for being such an inspiring human being. From the minute I saw him at my first water conference in Stockholm, his words inspired me so that we are now here today. And I would like to continue his inspiration into the future. I'd also like to thank Aziza for the work originating with the Water Governance Initiative, which has inspired so much work with stakeholders and really plotting a course for interactive work and really evaluating what's needed on the ground. And to Oriana for hosting us today. We have a marvelous panel, Mahen Bonetti, who's the founder and executive director of African Film Festival New York, Nick van de Giesen, who's the chair of Water Resources Engineering at TU Delft in the Netherlands, Maria Salvetti, our visitor from OECD, who is very inspiring, and Odwam Tembo from South Africa, who's the founder of World Merit South Africa. Let's Talk About Water is a film and water event, 15 years in existence, created to inspire discussion about water issues, water science, climate change, and using film as a catalyst. As founder and director, I've had some key ideas. I believe in the power of film. Water knits it all together. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Watersheds are natural boundaries which we can use to advantage. And the youth of today will inherit our mistakes and misconceptions. We need to help create tools for solutions. One of the things that brought us to this day is the prize that Secretary General won, the King Hassan II prize. This has inspired this study, the Africa Survey, and why we're here today. The film that we are showing at the end of the session is called Scenes of a Dry City, a 12-minute, very beautiful film about Cape Town and its potential for having experienced day zero, where they would have run out of water. But actually, in the session I just saw, Water Governance in African Cities, they actually were helped by so many institutions that they avoided the catastrophe. But the film, which won a prize from the World Press Organization, points out the value of prizes in awakening us to various issues. One of the other goals of this session is to invite you all to submit a short 2-minute film to the Let's Talk About Water.ca for Canada prize. And one of the reasons I've met Odwa was because I was a judge on a competition called a Pitchathon, which was a prize given to what's known as international wave makers. And he'll talk about that a little bit later. So welcome, Nick, welcome, Odwa, and welcome, Mahen Bonetti and Maria Salvetti. And let me know if I'm running over, because as I mentioned, I talk a lot. So why short films? 1 minute remaining, I'm going to talk fast. Short films, we in the water sector are a tribe. We speak a specific language to each other in reports filled with data, survey, and tools, creeping slowly towards improving lives and being very well-meaning. But who hears us? It's a crisis. We must accelerate our actions, and communications is the next frontier that we need to add to the OECD principles. Looking at African cities, there was a mayor in the previous session I attended, Water Governance in African Cities, who actually requested that media professionals aid in the resource development for African cities to build a bridge between science, economy, youth, and policy. And so I reach out to you, mayors in particular, to support the idea of creating short films and submitting them to the Let's Talk About Water.ca, Canada at the University of Saskatchewan competition. So I yield the floor to my first wonderful friend and speaker, Mahen Bonetti from the Africa Film Festival of New York City. Take it away, Mahen.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, fantastic. I had this situation the other day when we were Zooming with some filmmakers on the continent, and we were handicapped. Meanwhile, they had it, just perfectly set up. And anyway, as you said, I'm Mahen Bonetti. I'm the founder and director of African Film Festival, an organization which was created in 1990 by me. I jumped in with my feet first, and I learned how to swim, speaking of water, because I had all these ideals and ideas, and I thought everyone was on board. So the learning curve was steep, but I'm happy I, stayed the course. I was motivated to start the organization out of frustration. I was tired of the gaze. And I wanted to find a way to change the narrative of this representation of Africa and her people. Also to have robust and objective conversations in and about Africa. And also to find a space where I felt, where I could learn, I could see the familiar, I could find my common chord and feel comforted and empowered as well. And so I've always loved the cinema, and I've had a great appreciation for the moving image. So I discovered this trove of work made by African directors. And that's when the light bulb moment happened. I felt here we were telling our stories, whether it was good or bad. And for so long, images were what were used to represent or to show the world who Africa was, images we did not control. And here was this treasure trove of storytelling made by Africans. And whether the story was good or bad, or whether it challenged you, we were telling that story. And for me, that was just the light bulb moment that drove me to start the organization. And because of this, as I said, I wanted to find a way to counter the narrative about Africa that was, you know, at that time it was in the 80s, and more than ever, as long as I'd been in this country, that was when I'd seen the most coverage on Africa in the media. And there was no backstory. I wanted a backstory for myself. I wanted to have a balance. And so this is how the African Film Festival started. And last year we turned 30.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, it's been a really incredible journey. Despite the challenges, I'm really proud of the work that, I don't say me because it's a collective. It's we're connecting the dots, and more than ever in this climate we find ourselves right now, having that splice of information or that space to go and get this information is really important, because there is so much being said on the information highway. And where all this chatter, where do we find ourselves? We have to be at that table and be part of that conversation. And this is how a lot of these filmmakers, you know, especially now with the younger generation, who are, because of technology, have, you know, I mean, if you say the moving image is about storytelling, right? So cinema is really anchored in the art of story, oral tradition of African heritage. And a lot of these, this generation of filmmakers, of course, have an advantage of technology. And so they don't only use that cell phone to make calls, they use that cell phone also as a mobile station. As I said, when we spoke the last time, where they are making films, they're editing films, talking about what is happening in their community. They are putting their mark on the story that was started by the auteurs 50 years ago. So each generation is telling the story of their time. And of course, right now, the environment is a big, big issue for these kids, you know? And that has created sort of the devastation of unemployment, of food shortage, and water, of course, is central to that. The irony is we're surrounded by water in West Africa, and we have a lot of rivers. I mean, this is what is so ironic. But those, we also have to remember that the infrastructure that was created by or built by the colonialists was meant to sustain maybe 50,000 people. And I hope I'm not digressing.
No, go ahead.
So now you have this, you know, push to the city, this cosmopolitan area of most of these nations, or because of internal displacement, because of warfare, civil warfare, there's more, you know, there's more push into the city. So those cities have, you know, the critical mass cannot sustain the infrastructure that exists, cannot sustain that population. And so a lot of the crisis is due to that as well. Whereas you have the, and so these young people are talking about these issues in the stories they're telling. They're finding an angle, they're finding different entries to communicate that story, but to their peers, because it's not so much that they feel they have to take things into their own hands. So cinema is activism for a lot of us, and for, I think, a lot of the young people who are making films these days. And speaking of water, water is, in African tradition, it is sacred. When you are born, you're born in a sack of water. And when you are paying libation to your ancestors, water is involved. There's the mythical, there's the practical, and also, you know, when you come into someone's place, the first thing they ask, do you want water? Can I offer you some water? It's sacred to us. We have a lot of deep rivers in my parts of Africa. So we believe our ancestors, our spirits are there as well. They dwell there as well. So, and a lot of films, for example, Bamako, Musan, and even some of the films we showed this year, I think The Milkmaid also had some scenes of water. There were so many now, mixing them up, but the short format, we had a lot of shorts. And people don't realize to make a short film is not easier. It's
Yes.
actually because you have that, yes.
So Mahen, thank
Yes.
you so much for your words. We'll transfer to Nick, but just to say that the whole idea of filmmaking, the idea of the voice coming from Africa itself, not
Yes.
people outside of Africa telling the story. But the other thing is that there are many complex issues like policy, management,
Yes.
environment, science, to be explained. And I wonder if the youth are up to the challenge. I think that they are, to build a bridge between policymakers and their own futures. And so your history, you're bringing the history of African cinema to the table is very important. And we thank you for joining us. And we'll come back to you in a minute. And we're going to introduce Nick, who's going to be working in Africa, who's been working in Africa for a very long time. Nick Van de Heesen, welcome. And I'll let you say a few words, darling. Thank you so much for being with us.
I've sent unmute request.
Thank you, Linda. It's very nice to be here. Just a few words of where I come from. I once studied irrigation engineering, but yeah, investments in irrigation have dropped dramatically over the past, let's say, 30 years or so. So I moved a little bit more to water resources in general. I've done like you say, a lot of work in Africa because, well, maybe just by coincidence, but it just happens to be that I did my master, my PhD, postdoc. I all did it in Africa, and I still have a lot of projects in Africa. And I'll talk a little bit about those in the next couple of minutes. Maybe first a little bit about why I'm at all involved in this Let's Talk About Water thing, because I'm a scientist. You know, I'm supposed to write articles, publish them, do a lot of math and computer simulations and things like that. But we all realize, well, most of me and my colleagues, we realize that we also have to do outreach. And film is so powerful in that respect that we, you know, when Linda started talking about this, I immediately understood that, you know, we have to connect there, and we have to explain also the science of water by means of movies and films. And these short movies, they have been very, very inspiring over the years. So I also hope that this year there will be a great set of movies again. Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching them. Like I said, we have a lot of projects still going on. One project I'm very happy about and sort of proud of, not that I do it, but you know, the team that's working on that is, has a bit of a long name, the Trans-African Hydrometeorological Observatory. But it's the acronym is TAMO, and that's quite doable. And basically what we have now a network of over 600 weather stations divided over about 23 African countries. And they're just collecting data, and these data are freely available for scientists around the world, because that's something we notice that is missing continuously. Just the simplest basic data on things like rainfall, temperature, wind speed, and those kind of things. So, and even if these data are available, they often cannot be found, or they are decontextualized and things like that. So that it's a real problem. We work a lot with all the national weather services to improve that situation and to make sure that all the weather data, relevant weather data, and also the relevant water data are collected and also being used for the development of human and natural resources in Africa. A newer project that Linda asked me to say something about, especially, is what we call the African Water Corridor. You may be aware that there are several development corridors in Africa, and what they do then is they make sure there's a good road, there may be a railway, there may be an oil pipe, there's fiber optic connections for data, there's power, there's an energy line and everything. But they never talk about water. And we thought, like, wait a second, you know, that cannot be, because water is an essential part of development. If water is a limiting factor, as it often is in many places, but especially in sub-Saharan Africa, then water should stop being a limiting resource. And we've been seeing, of course, a lot of water projects in Africa over the past, let's say, 50 years or so, half a century. But we noticed that, well, a couple of things. One is that they tend to be in silos. So here's the drinking water project. Oh, let's put a pump in. Oh, here's an irrigation project. Let's put some canals in and a dam. Here's some sewage project. But these things have everything to, you cannot see one part separated from another. So these have to be connected and they have to be integrated. That's why we say water knits it all together, as we say here. And you have to do it that way, because you cannot just cut these things loose and fix one problem and then hope that the rest will follow immediately. The second very important principle of the African Water Corridor is that it's all locally thought out, it's locally organized, it's locally tested. We work very closely with all the partners along these corridors, and yeah, that's just a very central thing. It's not like oh, we have an idea, let's somewhere in the Netherlands, so let's try it out or something. No, it all comes with local partners. A lot of them are academic partners because we come from academia, but we really try to make sure that these solutions that are thought up really land. So that's another important part of it. At the moment, we're especially active along the corridor that runs from Maputo to Johannesburg, especially on the Mozambican side, and on the corridor that runs from Tema in Ghana to Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso. These are the ones we're starting with. We're also looking now into Uganda. We aim to especially, you talked about mayors, we're especially interested in cities, in let's say the medium-sized cities. Of course, everybody talks about the mega cities, and these problems are enormous, but you can have bespoke solutions, and there's people willing to invest in these mega cities. Whereas all these other cities that are also growing extremely fast, let's say 100,000 to 2 million people also need attention. So that's what we're focusing on in this project, these medium-sized cities.
Nick, thank you so much. That was perfect. You landed on a dime. That was wonderful. And the segue is fantastic, because the conference that I just attended, the Water Governance in African Cities, I think the value of OECD's reporting, these reports that they're launching in this week, does something very effective. Oftentimes, I think, as I said earlier, we're a tribe. We all talk to each other. The word does not get beyond our own boundaries. But in fact, by identifying mayors and addressing what you just said, which is, there's a word I just learned from this experience, agglomerations. So the idea is that there are cities which become megacities, but there are rural communities which are growing exponentially, which become a word that I never heard of before, agglomeration. So the idea of how you address population growth, urban growth, and lack of resources becomes very important. And to what your point as well, to link you to introducing Maria Salvetti, is the idea of thinking in basin thinking as opposed to political boundaries. Water doesn't know political boundaries. And thinking about watersheds, it's interesting because the French have governed the country by water basins, which is very enlightened thinking. And the way you look at the Africa water corridors, I think, is very dynamic, because you're looking at upstream and downstream, and the way that ecosystem services are integrated within basins, not segregated. And so Maria brings a great experience to the table as a water policy analyst and economist for OECD. And I welcome you, Maria Salvetti. Thank you so much for joining us. Take it away, Maria.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Linda. Just a few words, actually, that I'd like to share with you on actually the report that was just launched a few hours ago on water governance in Cape Town. Just to let you know that this has been a year-long work with, of course, counterparts from the city of Cape Town, but we have consulted and engaged with more than 80 stakeholders, either national stakeholders, local stakeholders, or provincial stakeholders. So really trying to highlight that the governance, the work on governance has to be multi-level and also multi-stakeholder kind of work. And also, just a few words I'd like to share with you, trying to reflect also on some elements, some key facts that are in the report, obviously, but that are also in the short movie that we will be seeing during this webinar, because in this movie that we'll all see in a few minutes, there are some interesting aspects that are touched upon. First of all, there is this idea of a level of water restriction that is presented in the very beginning of the movie with one of the police officer mentioning the level 6B of water restriction, meaning that there has been and there is still a level of water restriction, water use restriction in Cape Town. Obviously, the number of water level restriction has decreased, from the years 2017, 2018, where the drought was very vivid to today, also in the movie we see the job losses that were the consequence of this drought. And this has been something very important, not only in the example that we see in the movie for the car washing jobs, but also in the agriculture sector that is very important for Cape Town and for the Western Cape. So that is also a very important aspect of the droughts and of the water crisis, is that it spills over just the only water sector, obviously, and it has consequences in other sectors such as agriculture, for instance, and of course for the businesses as well, because you'll see in the movie demonstrations where people are demonstrating against tourists because they believe that tourists obviously are going to be using water and using a very scarce resource. And so I have to say that in the situation of Cape Town, the drought in Cape Town, there was really a very strong awareness raising campaign and a very strong communication campaign that was led both by the city of Cape Town as well as by the businesses of Cape Town to explain that tourism is vital for the economy of the city, and that tourism is not using so much water, and so there was this campaign, this very famous campaign for tourists and visitors, and it was called "Save Like a Local," save water like a local. So there's been a lot of efforts on communication, so that there's this big paradigm of communicating and collaborating to fight the drought and to overcome the water crisis. I also wanted to touch upon the boreholes that were drilled during the water crisis, and that have implications in terms of underground water management, but maybe we'll have plenty of time to discuss that later on. And I'll stop there because obviously I want to have some time for Q&A, later during this webinar. Thanks a lot.
Maria, thank you so much. It's so exciting to have you engage so deeply with the film and to express the ideas that are in the film, because I think where film is so valuable is providing the geography of the location, the context of the problem, the physical faces of people, and the actual experiences that they're having. And in 12 minutes, the film captures so much. The idea that people using film can express the water problems, water shortages, water issues, water complexity, and how it really affects human beings. I think, as I said earlier, I believe in the power of film. And what's so wonderful is that's how I met Odwa, was through the use of film as a communication tool in an endeavor that he's involved with called the International Wave Makers. And we're so excited because he also represents the youth. And in the survey, one of the data points that you've discovered is that something like 60% of the young people, of the population of the African continent from the survey will be under 30. And so how do we engage the young people with tools to really help them solve some of these problems and contribute to the knowledge base of these problems and knowledge sharing? So welcome, Odwa. We're very, very happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you, Linda. Hello, everyone. As introduced, my name is Odwa Ntsikamthembu. I am based in South Africa, Johannesburg. I studied geology and environmental sciences from the University of Cape Town. I specialize in water, climate change, and applied geomorphology. As Linda mentioned, that the founder of World Merit South Africa, which is a non-profit organization that tackles the UN SDGs through community-based projects. And I also volunteer with West Coast Foundation and the Wave Makers United, which is what we use to create a film for the competition where we're addressing issues around water globally around the world. So for me today, I'm just going to be touching on how film and media can actually be used to support communication as well as education in the field of water science. This is something that I've actually had experience with it. During my studies at UCT, we did several courses trying to look into the issues of science communication as to why we still have some people that may be finding it hard to understand the different challenges and issues and solutions that the scientists are trying to put forward to the different policymakers, to the public, because that is one of the main key things that I think when we look at the entire field, we're supposed to be trying to be focusing on. Film indeed can be used to support and educate everyone because of the visual, because of the creativity with it. And everyone has actually experienced what we just went through with the pandemic, whereby so many things went digital. Even this side event right now is actually digital. And Mahan also mentioned how young people get to use their cell phones more than just communication, but actually also as their mobile stations. And right now, social media has created different opportunities for people to be having these short clicks trying to capture their moments or trying to portray a message. Those have been the Reels, those have been the TikToks. And this competition, for instance, we are running with Let's Talk About Water, is going to be one of those examples to show how within 2 minutes, we can have so many people around the world trying to get across their solution, the challenges within that space. And this is going to be more effective to so many people because so many of the issues that we portray or we put forward as scientists, the jargon is either too complex or the issue itself is actually too complex to try to explain without including any visuals or any recordings, or even trying to be creative for the younger generation. So the film indeed is going to be helping with that. Back in 2015, during a project in Cape Town where we were looking into how feasible and how useful the attenuation ponds were in Khayelitsha, which is a township in Cape Town. The main key thing that came out of that research was the fact that the community itself did not even understand what those were, what were they supposed to do, and how were they supposed to be maintaining them. Because even when we're trying to use this scientific term to ask them where can we locate them, we had to actually understand how they were viewing them as the community, and that is the only way we were able to actually locate them because the jargon that was used was not the correct one. So what I've seen through films, through art, through creative art is that the jargon or the way they portray the message to the public is very much more different to what we use. And it's in layman use language, which is something that is very important and we should be doing around the world. The previous speaker also mentioned issues of boreholes, for instance. That is something that in South Africa, yes, we do have groundwater in some of the parts of the country, but the groundwater, for instance, being used in South Africa is one of the topics that we still need to get a lot of people to get to the idea of understanding ground use and groundwater use and the procedures of actually getting access to it. And if we can actually also use film as part of the educating while trying to communicate such solutions, then we can probably progress much faster than we have previously with other issues. And now obviously trying to make sure that the different solutions that are coming up or the different committees and the roundtables that I know that OECD is doing, C40 has also done it to have the world mayors that are linked to C40. While we want to challenge actually have OECD and any other stakeholders to do is to have more and more of these intergenerational dialogues, so that we make sure that we're not only seeing the young people and the people in film or the people in the creative arts as only the people that we should be bringing in instances of trying to get something across, but to actually understand that these people are actually also experts and are qualified to be in these roundtable discussions, and also beyond those roundtable discussions to actually have practical solutions that can be a joint collaboration between the two generations to make sure that whatever is being implemented from a design phase to the evaluation phase is inclusive, and most importantly, is feasible and sustainable. And through that entire process, film is going to be capturing everything nicely, creatively so, and making sure that the archives are nicely well kept. The last two things that I'll end with is that, for instance, with trying to promote and trying to push for film to be used for education and also supporting the communication and science, we also need to have the investment in it being done, because already as scientists, we are trying to put for more funding in terms of climate financing. So while trying to strategize that and get that funding, we need to make sure that the film being used to support communication and education in the water science, it needs to be included with that. Just 23rd of February, Global Citizens published that the next 6 green jobs, at number 2, it was actually green designers and the creatives, simply because they know how to push boundaries and also inspire, and lastly, to have a multi-sectoral and disciplinary approach with their communication. If that is the case for the future in terms of green jobs, then why are we not investing more in film and the creatives in the science field? Thank you.
Thank you, Odwa. That was absolutely fantastic. When we had our practice session, I was feeling like I was in a theater and not on a Zoom. And I was doing all the talking, and I was interrupting everybody, and I was screaming out questions. And Odwa is the one who said, no, you have to do it a certain way. You must start the conversation, introduce the person, give them 6 minutes to speak, summarize what they're saying, and then introduce the next person. So really, I thank you, Odwa, because you have really helped shape this panel. And I really admire the youth having the confidence and the courage to realize that they have to be putting the small part of the wedge into the bureaucracy that has existed for so many years. At the same time, I have to thank OECD, because OECD just hosting Let's Talk About Water is such an unusual kind of side event and I actually did an event with them many years ago in 2015. And it was quite formal. And I remember Aziza saying to me something like, you actually could have been a little more lively. You could have made it a little more fun. And I thought, oh my God, are you kidding? I was so nervous. But what I want to say is, because they have identified mayors, and because they're going to have a roundtable in Dakar, and because we have someone like Nick who has the science, and Odwa who's connected to the youth, and Maria who really gets the power of film in communicating information, and Mahen who's connected to everyone in the film world in the continent, the idea that we create something like the SDG little imagery. The thing is, when we had Millennial Development Goals, nobody, when you mentioned them, knew what they meant. The minute that you had this image of these boxes with colors, with numbers, and with images, the simplicity of these boxes, these numbers, these images, what I heard from a previous session was, when you have ministries and you're convincing them to use water as a thread because water knits it all together, the language of the SDG graphic made it easy. I am getting a sign from my coordinator that I should be quiet. I warned you, I talk a lot. So Sean,
there's only 5 minutes left for a Q&A, or discussion. So unfortunately, because of the film, we only have 5 minutes remaining before the film.
How should we proceed? I warned you, I'm not familiar with all this technology. What would you like? So the questions are coming from the audience who's participating. Let me introduce Sean. He's the voice, like the Wizard of Oz in the background. He is our host from the University of Saskatchewan. Let's Talk About Water.ca. And Let's Talk About Water.ca is the entry point for the short film.
So Linda, what I would suggest is, given that there's only 5 minutes left. I would like to go back to some of the panelists who I had unfortunately had to cut short due to time. So I'd like to return to Mahan, if you would like to add some additional thoughts to, I feel like I cut you off at the last sentence. So please, if you want, take it away. It's yours.
No, I believe all the other panelists spoke about stakeholders. And for example, I mean, I'll speak for my part of Africa. I find that farmers have the most discipline. They work with the environment, you know, and the problem is, in terms of policy, there's so much, there's no regulation, and there's mining, there's deforestation going on, and that also affects the environment. And this is what a lot of young people are trying to address. And so how do you find this balance between, you know, the miners, the government, and then also the livelihood of people, because that affects everything. And this is what young people are speaking about. They have to take the power into their own hands. And I think it is changing in Sierra Leone. I mean, you find out that a lot of mining is filthy. It affects the environment. And the last time I was back home, I saw that, you know, they've been cleaning up some of the rivers, and also rehabilitating the land, you know, by planting things where mining took place. So the youth have a lot of power, and they have created that change. They have caused that change to happen, and also using this medium to inform their you know, their base, their own generation. So I am hopeful. But as Odwa was saying, there has to be some sort of support. There has to be balance. There has to be this intergenerational conversation where they're brought at the table, because it is their future. And Africa is the young, I mean, it's 60% of our continent is under 40. So we are the future, many levels. Anyway, so hopefully, you know, we're all doing our bit here. If there are more of these sorts of panels, conversations going on, I think it gives those, we're supporting them morally, at least.
Mayan, maybe we can do a Let's Talk About Water at the Africa Film Festival next year.
Linda, I'm going to give it to Odwa now. He wanted to answer a question.
Okay, but can I have a minute before?
No, time, I have to give it to Oda. Sorry.
Thank you, Mehen. I just want to quickly, because we have a comment from the chat, I'm going to try my best to quickly try to answer that so that I can give my colleague to answer the last part. And I'm more than willing to engage further with the person. But there's a question about, is there a different kind of approach, or is there a different kind of approach to film that is needed in crisis moments compared to non-crisis? With that, I'm just going to put it bluntly and say, no, there isn't. Because the thing with that, the original issue with the entire thing of science communication, it starts even if you're not using the science. I mean, you're not using the film, you're just using media. The lens that we use to tell the issue around science is very important. Whether we're telling it from a negative lens or from a positive lens, that affects how the public takes it. So what we just need to make sure is that while we are bringing the scientists and the creatives into one table to work together and to train them together, we need to know that when we are putting that information out there, if we are using a negative lens in a crisis situation, because that is what mostly happens, are we using that negative lens to bring in the urgency of the situation? But while we are doing that, we need to make sure that we are not trying to ruin all the other things that are actually being implemented to try to solve that issue. Similarly, if we are using the positive lens, we need to make sure that we are not using it to only put in the good work or the progress about the issue in the film, but we also need to make sure that we are not biased by not highlighting some of the shortcomings relating to that issue. So we just need to make sure that whatever is happening between the film and the media and the scientists, we must integrate it and make sure the appropriate training and capacity building is in place so that no message or no miscommunication is being done at the end of the day.
So if I can just jump in very quickly to answer the last part of the question from Kevin that we got in the chat. So the question was, the last part of the question was, how do you avoid film becoming static or out of date? Well, I think that with the movie that we're about to see, we have a great example of that, you know, a movie not becoming out of date, because the issues that are raised and shown in the movie, I think, and that touch upon issues of communication, issues of water competition between users. Well, these issues, they always arise, you know, during a water crisis, water scarcity crisis. And so those issues, to some extent, cannot become out of date, because they are there. Each time there is a crisis, you need to communicate about the crisis, about the answers that you are proposing to overcome the crisis. And you have to deal with, for instance, water competition between users. So it's really reflecting on issues that are there, no matter what, during water crisis. So I do believe that this movie is a very good example of how a movie can not become outdated and not static at all.
Linda, feel free to have the last word before we start the film. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Maria, that was excellent. All of you have been so excellent. Am I able to be heard, darling?
Yes, you are. You're unmuted, please. Oh, no, wait, you just muted yourself. If you give me one moment, I'm sending you a unmute request. No, unmute request has been sent. You have to click the button. No, Linda, you have to click the button. There you go.
So I can talk now?
Yes, go ahead, please.
I want to thank the panelists profoundly, Mahen Bonetti, Odwa Mutembo, Nick Van de Giesen, and Maria Salvetti for joining us. This was a very exciting conversation. I do want to say that when you see a film with Let's Talk About Water in the framework, usually the film comes first and the conversation comes after. So because I thought it would be better to have the film at the end, people can watch. Unfortunately, we're just going to not be reappearing, but please send any comments to OECD or to let's talk about water.ca. And I just want to thank you all so much. I think it was a wonderful session. And I again want to thank OECD, Aziza Akmush, Secretary General Angel Guria, and Oriana Romano for allowing us to partake in this wonderful water days. And hopefully this is the first annual that there will be a second and third and fourth, because they are very, very important. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Stay in touch and
Thank you.
apply for the contest. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.